Being a chartered manager means that you are a specialist in that area, and it means you've got all the skill to do the job to the best of its ability.
You are seen as a leader, a true leader who has credentials behind the great work you've already been doing.
It's enhanced my understanding, it's enhanced my skill set, it's improved my mindset.
It makes all the difference.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon with you. I'm Anne Franca, the Chief Executive of CMI, and I'm so pleased that this afternoon we're going to be shining a light on a very important piece of research that CMI's Everyone Economy Committee did called Walking the Walk. Now, actually, this research found a number of very important things, and I just wanted to share very briefly some of the things that really leapt out for me. The first thing that this research highlighted is that when it comes to feeling included, having a supportive line manager was the number one reason people cited that made them feel included. It was actually more important than EDI initiatives. It was more important than workplace culture even. And the reason for that is quite simply that when people had trained line managers, they felt supported, they felt heard, they felt listened to, and they were much more likely to be able to bring their whole selves and their authentic selves to work. So really what this is doing is underscoring the importance of trained line managers in helping organizations to become and to be more inclusive. Now, we know that EDI has been very much discussed as to whether or not organizations should pull back from this work. But what the Walking the Walk research really found is what we at CMI have always believed, which is when you have inclusion at the heart of your company strategy, that's when you really get practical and achievable results. And we think that the really inspirational leaders know this. So people like Dame Amanda Blanc, who is our recent gold medal winner, people like CEO of BT, Alison Kirkby, they know that when they knit their inclusion activities into their business strategies, they get real, tangible results and higher employee engagement. And of course, the other person who is very well aware of this is today's chair, Sir Trevor Phillips. Trevor has chaired the Everyone Economy very ably for the last 3 years. He's been in this capacity on the CMI board. He's devoted his career to championing and understanding the importance of workplace inclusion for all. And I'm now going to hand over to him. He's going to lead us through today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anne, for that kind introduction. I think you slightly described somebody that I don't quite recognize, but I'll take the compliment. But anyway, this is, if you like, a stage in the work that the CMI has undertaken in thinking about how the economy might work for everyone, every section of society, and how we might engage every part of our workplaces. And I just want to, first of all, say thank you to CMI and particularly for promoting this work, for helping us, or bringing us together, I should say, to create and produce the report that we did. And made a couple of points about that work. I will simply just add 2 or 3 simple observations about it. First of all, I think we said something that I don't suppose will come as much of a surprise to anybody in the human capital business, but quite often the simplest and most important things are things that everybody forgets to say, which are that leadership and management are essential to creating maximum productivity and capability in organizations. And we sometimes forget that. But that the challenge that most managers face today is that their workplaces, for a variety of subjective and objective reasons, are much more diverse than they used to be, and much more diverse in their needs. In the old days, one might be able to say that irrespective of what sex or orientation or race or religion people were, the objective of bringing them into the workplace was essentially to beat them into shape, to be pretty much the same as everybody else. Essentially, whatever shape you came in, round, oval, or whatever it is, we were going to turn you into square pegs to fit the square holes that most workplaces had created. I think for all sorts of reasons that everybody on this call will understand, that is no longer either possible. And I think what we have been able to show in the last 10 to 15 years of work, particularly in relation to inclusion, is that that's not great for businesses either. First of all, because most people work better, contribute more, if they feel that their specialness, their identity, their unique configuration is recognized by the organization within which they work. And secondly, that for managers and leaders, the truth is that objectively, the kinds of people that make our businesses and our organizations what they are somewhat different to the kinds of, or the mix of people that they used to be. I mean, just at a very simple level, if we think about culture and religion and inheritance, ethnic inheritance, we know that over the next 5 years, all population increase and to some extent, to a large extent, all increase in the workplace will come from immigration, and those immigrants will come from places where they have as many skills and talents as the people who live in Britain now, but they will bring different expectations as well as different skills and capabilities with them. And that the great workplace and the great leadership will recognize that fact and think hard about how to extract the maximum capability from those different groups of people. I think that the last thing I want to say, which I think is important about the gathering of, I think, 300 to 400 people that we have on this, is that pretty much everybody here is going to be here because they understand the importance of what Anne has said and what I have just said. But what most of us are constantly looking for are ways in which we can meet that challenge more effectively, more practically, cost effectively, of course, these days, and how we make sure that our organizations and particularly their leadership deal with this challenge at the same level and in the same way as they deal with other business challenges, the march of technology, the ups and downs of the business cycle, and so on. I guess what I think we've discovered in the last 2 decades is that the challenge of diversity and the challenge of inclusion is as big a challenge as all of those other issues. And in this country, particularly in the United Kingdom, if there is a contribution to productivity that needs to be worked up and worked through, it is how we bring different kinds of people together in the workplace to increase our productivity. So, enough from me. Let us hear from people who actually know what they're talking about. And I'd like to start. I am going to ask Paul Wilden and Heather Melville and Diane Lightfoot and Raj Tulsiani and Nicholas Smith to speak in that order in a moment. But I'd like to start, and I'm really delighted to be able to start with my successor at the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who I think has done a terrific job. And obviously I have ambivalence about this because there's a horrible suspicion in me that she's done a better job than I would have done myself. But I'm really delighted to invite Kishore Faulkner to kick us off today. Kishore.
Thank you so much, Sir Trevor, and it's a real pleasure to be here and to speak to your colleagues and guests today. I'd like to stress that there's a kind of management that I think we all aspire to, and that brings out the best in performance in all our people. And that is very simply 3 things that matter. You want the kind of management that delivers for both high standards and recognizes promise at all levels, that promotes the sense of joint endeavor, as well as nurturing individual talent, that diversity that you just spoke about, and that recognizes that work is integral to our personal development at all levels, including outside our working lives. So across the West, we have seen, as Anne said, a backlash against diversity and equality. Some of that, I have to say, is merited, especially when it's merely virtue signaling. And in other areas, I think we can agree that some of these initiatives also risk alienating employees, depending on how they're implemented. That slight feeling that there isn't exact fairness across your organization. Now that's in stark contrast to the findings in the CMI report, which show that HR leaders and employees alike are united in their belief that a strong focus on equality, diversity, and inclusion is essential for success. What should be clearer, perhaps, is that the promise of equality and diversity is best delivered when it's taken out of the HR arena and has a buy-in across the whole organization. If it's going to make a difference, where we can identify tangible improvements which also improve the business interest, as well as deliver on people's potential, then that is where we need to concentrate. So I want to say a word or two about the legislative landscape, which is changing quite rapidly. Building a diverse workforce can take many forms, including an appreciation of the diversity of thought. So we need, within the bounds of professional conduct, workplaces which allow for a diversity of ideas. But when I refer to professional standards, I mean that those bounds are really important, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. Part of EHRC's role as Great Britain's equality regulator is to make employers aware of their duties under new legislation, where they affect matters which relate to the Equality Acts. One of the most notable pieces of legislation in the area going through at the moment is the Employment Rights Bill in Parliament. There are many measures in the bill that have the potential to reduce workplace inequalities, yet other measures may impact negatively on overemployment, as some employers are starting to point out. I'll speak to those which directly affect the Equality Act and will be enforceable by us at EHRC. The introduction of mandatory gender equality action plans, for example, have the potential to sharpen employer focus and drive action to tackle the causes of any unlawful pay differences between men and women. If this bill is passed, employers with 250 employees and over would have to publish equality action plans, outlining the steps they're taking to tackle gender pay gaps in their organization. And there'll be improved reporting and equitable pay structures, which can be critical for building the foundations of an equal workplace. We worked with CMI to produce guidance on that called Close Your Gender Pay Gap, which is a toolkit to help employers take action to do more in that area. Another important area of relevance to female employees is supporting staff who are experiencing menopause symptoms. In 2024, we published advice for employers to help them understand the legal issues. If menopause symptoms have a long-term and substantial impact on a woman's ability to carry out day-to-day activities, they could be considered a disability for the purposes of the Equality Act. As workers are protected from discrimination, harassment, and victimization on the basis of disability, an employer must make reasonable adjustments for their staff if those symptoms amount to a disability. Then the landscape of work has also shifted considerably in recent years. In many workplaces, it's no longer commonplace for employees to be expected to work from the office in person every day. We've seen more and more organizations shift to hybrid and flexible models of working, although others are abandoning that experiment too. While hybrid working arrangements can bring some benefits to staff, if the policies aren't designed very well or implemented ineffectively, they can be a barrier to developing a good workplace culture, sometimes leaving disabled or younger or older staff isolated and impairing learning and collaboration. That's why we've provided employers with guidance to support, for example, disabled staff in this case, to participate fully through making reasonable adjustments for them. Fostering a positive workplace environment requires getting the basics right, especially for customer-facing staff. That's why we welcome stronger protections against sexual harassment for employees in the Worker Protection Act 2023. That legislation, which we enforce, places a proactive duty on all employers to take preventative steps to protect their workers from workplace sexual harassment. Now, tackling sexual harassment at work has very real impacts for employees across the country. We know that building an inclusive workplace starts with good management and committed leaders. So we worked with the company IKEA to make sure they could provide training on improved harassment policies to all line managers and HR staff, something Anne picked up in her introductory remarks about how important training was in the workplace. We need to make sure that managers, Anne talked about line managers, that managers can support their workers. We know that managers want to, and we need to equip them with the tools to do it as best they can. But more than that, it's accepted that got a lump in the throat. More than that, it's accepted that diversity matters beyond just the diversity of the workforce. Groupthink impairs good decision-making, and diversity has to cover diversity of thought adequately. Whatever industry you work in, it's diversity of thought which allows for better risk-taking and results. By exposing yourself to different voices and perspectives, including those that may be opposed to your own views, you enrich your organization and make it all the more likely to succeed. In our role as an equality regulator, we'll continue to uphold the law so that everyone gets a fair chance in life. We know that CMI is committed to that too, and it's been a real pleasure to work together and to look forward to the future with endeavour and hope. Thank you.
Kishore, thank you so much for that. And I think we'll come back to several of the points that you've raised in your survey of the landscape. I suspect that there will be people even now popping into the chat box to ask the question, is it right that DEI should be taken out of the hands of HR? Or is that a radical proposition, sort of thing that, frankly, take your life in your hands, proposing to HR people. Anyway, here we go. I want to introduce, first of all, three members of the committee itself, Paul Wilden, Heather Melville, and Diane Lightfoot, to talk about their understanding and what they've taken from the work that we've all done together over the last couple of years. And I'd like to start with Paul, who's had, 3 decades in banking here and Pacific and so on. Paul, your thoughts?
Thank you very much, Trevor, and thank you for immediately aging me as well for the audience. But my thanks also to Anne and the team at CMI for this opportunity. And just a little bit about me as an introduction that will hopefully give a sense of why inclusive management and inclusion are so important to me. As you can probably see from the screen, I'm a senior advisor for Warburg Pincus. That's a relatively new position for me starting earlier this year. And I have a number of other advisory roles that sit within the sphere of financial services, which is really where my career has been, both in Europe and in Asia Pacific, and specifically working in London, Singapore, Sydney, and Hong Kong. So I've seen firsthand the cultural aspects of inclusion as well from working in different parts of the world. And I think recognizing that CMI is equally a global institution, it's important to kind of reference that for our friends of CMI in Asia. So alongside Warburg Pincus, I've been an advisor for a mid-market PE firm called Lovell Minnick for the last 2 years. And equally, I'm working for Oliver Wyman, global management consulting, but in the sphere of M&A related to private equity. I've been a companion of the CMI now for, I think it's close to 5 years. I've been on the board of companions for slightly less time. And I've been involved in speaking about inclusion. And if anyone looks at my LinkedIn profile, they'll see a reference to D&I being in my DNA, really since life began for me. And what I mean by that is that I was born with a condition called microcephalopatia, which means I'm missing my right ear, and I'm also profoundly deaf on my right side. So I've dealt with levels of discrimination as a result of my ear since childhood. Equally, and on top of that, I'm also a gay man. So I also cover that aspect of intersectionality. And both of those elements of my personality have been both positives and negatives to me during my career. Picking up again on the reference to international, when I was given the opportunity to move to Asia back in 2005, I arrived in Singapore fresh off the plane, thinking that because I'd be given the opportunity, I knew what was expected of me when I walked into the office on that first day. I was effectively like an untrained manager walking in there, and I made a number of mistakes as I settled into my role in Singapore that could have been avoided with the right kind of training. And that's something which I know we can cover in more detail during this webinar. I will talk a bit later about reasonable adjustments. I will talk also about employee resource groups. And I will also mention later my catchphrase, which I've really enjoyed using over the last couple of years, which is nothing about me without me, which is very much leans into inclusion. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Trevor.
And for anybody who would like to know more, I hope Paul won't mind me saying that his, I think it's headed Paul's story on the Microtia UK website is both affecting and revealing. Let me turn next to my great friend, who I will not dare to age in any possible way, because I know she'll come around to my house and punch me. Heather Melville, who has been a great partner as the deputy chair of our committee. Heather.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. A very special thank you to you, Trevor, and to CMI for always really being bold and tackling the subjects that sometimes people are scared of. I was thinking about this today, and I was thinking, how many more years will it be that we'll talk about what diversity and inclusion really means and what companies need to do to make that change? A little bit about me before I go there. So I'm a partner at Stork & May, which is a CEO advisory business. So we work predominantly to help CEOs transition in and out of businesses and executive coach them at the same time. I wear another hat where I'm the Chancellor of the University of York. Many of these hats, I've been the first person of colour, and I certainly will not be the last. I've had a career in banking, which has taken me over 40 years, seen so much change happen in that world, still a lot more to happen. Been a companion of CMI since it started. I've been part of the CMI family and chair of CMI Women for close to 8 years. I stepped down last year just because my tenure was over, and a trustee of CMI. So I'm really invested in the work that they do. Apart from that, I'm a mother of 2 sons and a grandmother, and we'll leave it at that. The thing for me today is really thinking about, what are we going to do differently? When do we stop talking about the whole D&I topic? So for the last couple of weeks, we have heard, both in this country and in the US, and I promise not to mention any politics, where people were talking about, we're going to get rid of DEI, it's not needed. Well, can you really get rid of me? Can you really get rid of people that look like me, people who are diverse in many different ways? So actually, when you say that you want to get rid of us, that's what you're trying to say. I'm not ready to go anywhere yet, right? So I've got a lot more work to do. And the work for me is, how do we help leaders become more inclusive leaders? And how do we help those that are marginalized feel empowered to feel included? So there are 3 things for me that any chief exec or any leader of any business needs to have on their radar. The first is access to all of the very best talent that exists. You cannot run a business without the very best talent. And that means people that come from different walks of life, different cultural backgrounds, and different abilities. Secondly, as an owner of an organization or a leader of an organization, you have to care about the reputation. How do you build a strong reputation that people want to work with you, that people want to stay working with you, that people will want to do business with you, and suppliers will think they can transact with you? And of course, the third point for me is, you have to be a commercially strong business for anyone to take notice of you. All of those things are wrapped in inclusion. You can't do them in isolation, right? And so when I think about the challenges that we're going through now, each and every country, every day you think about the news, every day you think about the people we love and we care about, it's getting closer and closer to home. We actually have to think about what's next. What do we do next to create the world that we need to be in? So one of the things I want to say, and this is something that stayed with me for quite a while, quite often you hear it said, when people are from diverse backgrounds, and I don't just mean Black, I just don't mean male or female, I mean every different spectrum, which means they're different, we think we have to fix them so they can fit in. That is absolutely a myth, and it's not happening on my watch. What we've got to do is we've got to educate the other people around them so that they understand how to identify and how to nurture and how to empower talent when it comes in that doesn't look like them. We need to make sure we educate our leaders. Quite often, we give leaders these big jobs to take care of our people, our most valuable asset, and we don't invest in giving them any training whatsoever. We base their role on the fact that they are able to deliver high-performing numbers, but we don't know how they're actually guiding and empowering and leading their people to be the best that they can be. So I think with all of that in place, and the fact that companies need to think about people who pay their bills. Who are your clients? What do they look like? I was with a leader of an organisation the other day. Said, Heather, we need to do more to make sure we attract people that look like the customers who we work with. That means if there are no women, there are no people who are different, no one that's Black, brown, or whatever culture you are on the board of some of these big organisations that are making decisions about how they transact with us. How will they be able to hear what we're trying to say? How will they be able to meet our needs? And I think these things are really important. The other thing I want to say is we need to build the support in education, because it starts from a young age. If at a young age people tell our children that they can't be because they don't fit in, they will believe that throughout all of their working career. And we have to change that. From a young age, we've got to make sure that education is key in making people feel included and knowing that they can be the best version of themselves. So for me, it's now time for action. As the CMI heading says, it's time to walk the talk. Let's stop talking about what we're going to do and let's start doing what we should be doing as great leaders. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Heather. And that's a big challenge to everybody. I should just remind everyone that Heather glossed over it, but she is Chancellor of York University, one of our most distinguished universities. I think it would say it's probably the top university in the north of England. And I know that I had a daughter who attended there. But more importantly, her predecessors were Janet Baker, possibly the greatest singer of the 20th century, other than Aretha Franklin, and one of my first bosses, Greg Dyke. So she comes with credentials of a very, very high level. I say this because I think we might want to also reflect in discussions what it is that the corporate world might learn from public sector and not-for-profit organizations. There are new things happening there that I think might help us understand how we get the most out of everyone. Let me turn now to third member of our committee, Diane Lightfoot of the BDF, who I think has been a very positive contributor with some of the ideas in the report.
Thank you very much, Trevor, and it's a pleasure to join you. And I'm not sure I can follow Heather, but I will do my best. So I'm Diane Lightfoot. I'm CEO of Business Disability Forum. We are a business-facing membership organisation and charity, and we work with over 600 businesses across the private, public and voluntary sectors to help them get better at recruiting and retaining disabled employees and also serving disabled customers. And of course, the two go hand in hand. If you have a diverse and representative workforce, as other speakers have alluded to, you're much more likely to be able to serve your customers. I've been in the disability inclusion space for 21 years. And I myself have a long-term condition which I share really just to make it feel safer for others to do the same. And I was very, very pleased to be part of the Everyone Economy Committee and part of the Walking the Walk report. And one thing though I wanted to highlight from the report is that it found that disabled employers are more likely to disagree that they felt supported and included and that their organisation had an inclusive company culture, compared to employees who didn't report a disability. And at Business Disability Forum, BDF for short, our ethos is about a whole organisation approach. So we believe that getting it right on inclusion is not just about HR or D&I teams, important though they are, but it needs to go right across the business. And we have a framework that supports that looks at 10 different areas across a business, which you'll be thankful to know I'm not going to go into. But if I'm asked to highlight which I think are the most important, then I always pick out senior leadership, workplace adjustments, and line managers. And I know Paul mentioned adjustments, so I will say a little bit about that. And it's no surprise, I'm sure, that workplace adjustments are often the difference between somebody thriving at work or just surviving, or worse, falling out of the workplace altogether. And I'm sure you will know this if you're here, but can be really simple changes or tweaks to a role, things like assistive tech or ergonomic equipment, or different working patterns or breaks or lighting or different environments, all sorts of things. And I have been thinking lately that adjustments and accessibility more generally are actually a tangible signifier of organisational culture. They kind of take the intent of the culture you want to have into reality. They kind of operationalise it, if you like. In 2023, we carried out a piece of research for the second time, our Great Big Workplace Adjustment Survey. And again, not surprisingly, we found that line managers play an absolutely pivotal role. So in that survey, we asked for opinions on all sorts of things, including, for example, adjustments passports that were just being discussed and launched at the time. And some people liked them and some people didn't. But the consistent message was that the single most important thing, the single most important intervention, if you like, was a great line manager with a trusted relationship, as indeed Anne said right at the beginning. But we also found that managers generally didn't feel they got enough support when it came to supporting their team members in place. There was difficulty with access to budgets, complicated processes, and all sorts of blockers that made it difficult for good managers who wanted to do the right thing to actually do that. And we also know that lots of managers still worry about talking about disability, using the wrong language, and so say nothing. And in turn, their disabled employees don't ask for the support they need. So the first time we did that adjustment survey, we found that over a third of people said that they hadn't asked for an adjustment that would have helped them because they were worried their manager would treat them differently. And of course, we all know that great policies live or die, slightly melodramatic, but not very, on their implementation by line managers. And that kind of consistency, like line manager postcode lottery, is a real issue. So I'm very supportive of the report and really can see from our work that training support for managers is key. And I would equally argue that people management needs to be seen as a profession, if not a vocation, rather than just the default way to progress through an organisation. You know, you're good at a thing, so then you get given people to manage. And if you're great at people management, then that's great for you and it's great for the people that you manage. But if you're not, then it isn't. And on the disability piece, it's worth remembering that disability affects about 24% of the population, nearly 1 in 4 of us. And as we need to work for longer, that's going to be even more important because 83% of disabilities are acquired, not present from birth. So I would argue it's part of the human condition. It's really important. It's core to being a great line manager to be able to support disabled colleagues. And it's not just the right thing to do, it's good for business too. So that's just a bit of an intro from me.
Dan, thank you so much. And I think we should highlight the point you made about dealing with the everyday economy and D&I and so on as a whole organization project, as opposed to something that you hand to the, forgive me if this expression offends anybody, but I think lots of leaders think of it this way, to the handmaidens over at HR, and they can take it away and not mean you don't have to worry about it, and you can get on thinking about important things like who gets to go to the cup final for your company. All right, let's talk. Let's move on to a speaker who comes from outside of the committee, and I'm slightly fearful, but also delighted to, full disclosure, introduce a colleague as chair of Green Park, a company that's grown partly because of its brand and its success in the area of diverse recruitment. I'm going to introduce our chief executive, who I have to say is here not because I've asked for him to be here. I was slightly surprised when somebody told me he was on the list, but I suspect because it's got around that from time to time I will sit in meetings with him and he will say something which, as the chair of the company, I ask myself, is he more interested in doing the right thing than in making more money for the company? And annoyingly, clearly, he's often more interested in the first thing than the second. But anyway, that's an insight into our board meetings and the rows that we have. But I'm thrilled that Raj Tulsiani is here to talk a bit about what we've been doing at Green Park and, in a way, I suppose, how it's led to the success that we've had as a company. Raj.
Thank you, Trevor, and thank you for the first introduction you've given me in 12 years of working together. So I wear a couple of hats, and I think they're both interesting for this conversation. The first, as Trevor mentioned, is as founder and CEO of Green Park, which is an executive search and advisory business. In a good year, it places around 450 people a year. Not anything like that this year, I'm afraid. We work with 19 of the world's 50 biggest companies. And the processes we developed in 2006, 2007 around inclusion mean that we've kind of got this lifetimes of experience around what works, what doesn't work. what drives our 84% four-year retention rate in our clients. I also co-founded Race Equality Matters, which is a predominantly UK-based charity that provides Race Equality Week for around 6 million people in 6,000 companies a year, has 25,000 active participants and 300 independent judges. Apart from running Race Equality Week, we also did the My Name Is campaign around microaggressions and micro-incivilities in the workplace globally, which got us 1.75 billion hits in the first month. So Green Park was based on a simple idea, which organizations would be more sustainable and trusted if they could think differently about talent. And Race Equality Matters was founded on a simple idea, which is talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. So what excites me and what's been my life's work is bringing the voice of the appointable candidate who's not on people's radars into the room and balancing talent equations in complex organizations that are trying really hard to deliver their brand promises. A lot of these promises have already been made. And when people talk about, cutting back on diversity and inclusion, well, I don't see any firms saying we're going to pay women less. I don't see any technologists or CIOs saying, well, we're no longer interested in neurodiverse people who can actually help us understand this emerging world of AI and data and risk, etc. So I think what we're really talking about is something political. When I talk to my clients, there are three things that are holding progress back. The first thing is there is still in the corporate world and large government departments a commitment that, or a belief is probably a better word, that increasing representation increases corporate risk. It's simply not true, but it's there. And whether it's through affinity bias or bias around sector, this really does make new appointing, promoting, paying different types of people seen as more risky. That means that stories and the amplification of aspirations that we've had over the last 5 years polarize the workforce. So lots of people in the workforce who have got zero-sum thinking, which is the second barrier to change. If your leadership has got zero-sum thinking, then it's very difficult to get them to look at talent in a different way, because under pressure, they will always revert to the things that they feel will give them the biggest return in the first 6 months. So there's many things I like about this report, particularly the areas of difference in perception and sentiment, but the need for training and the need for making that training bespoke to organizations based on their context is super important. Because, and my third point is, we have become addicted as a country on manifesting and better articulation of our own demands. We have not yet worked out that our demand as a corporate is only one side of the equation. And in order to outperform other competitors, either for competitive advantage or for talent, we need to better understand the supply side dynamics on the other side of the bridge. Make sure that we are both an employer of choice, or at least one that can be really trusted to do what it says on the tin. And that's never been more important, because we have real gaps in our workforces. We have real gaps around skills. We have 5 generations in the workplace for the first time. We have real gaps around polarization in the workplace, and this manifests itself in a new challenge for organizational leadership, which training, I'm sure, will be an important solution to, but also they cannot cut and paste from next door anymore. They have to have an individual stance, they have to have a corporate stance, they have to knit these things together. So that's why, in my view, inclusion is a genuine form of competitive advantage for not just organizations, but for organizational leaders who increasingly will succeed or fail through their own personal ability to influence and inspire others.
Raj, thank you very much. I'm absolutely not going to add anything to that, because that's kind of what we both believe, and have been trying to pursue for some time. And with just one small piece of corporate propaganda, I think one or two others are beginning to see the light, but only dimly. Let me turn last. We've been talking a lot about employees and what they need and so on. But I would say that over the last couple of decades, the voice of the employee, I suppose one might have to say, has been a little bit muted. That's not the fault of the organisation that our next speaker represents, but I think something to do with the world of work and something that's been missing in the way that we think about how we build policy. But I'm delighted that the Trade Union Congress is, if I can put it this way, definitely back on the park and playing a big role in thinking not just about workers' wages and conditions, but also how do workplaces operate best, and perhaps one day how we might deal with the persistent and perennial problem of declining productivity in the British workplace. So I'm really delighted to welcome Nicola Smith, Director of Policy at the TUC. Nicola.
Thanks so much, Trevor, and thanks also to CMI for the invite to speak today, and also for inviting me to be part of the Everyday Economy Committee. So I'm Nicola Smith, and I am Policy Director at the Trade Union Congress, currently broadcasting from its extremely hot offices in central London. And we represent 48 trade unions across the UK, and that's 5.5 million working people that are union members for affiliated unions. I think this work for me showed a great deal of consensus actually across the committee about the importance of great managers and the importance of great training as a way to enable managers to get there, but also of the productivity gains that come when everybody is treated fairly and with dignity and is supported to make their best contribution at work. And, you know, I'd encourage you to have a look at the research and to read it, because for me, one thing that came through quite strongly from it was also the importance of voice and a voice of employees, and the say-do gap. I think the work is described as in the report, where, you know, you do get some very impressive findings. 8 in 10 HR leaders, for example, believing that senior management identifies and deals with inappropriate behaviour in a timely fashion, but then fall somewhat, not completely to the bottom, but, you know, when employees are asked, those who aren't in the management role, their view on the same question falls down to fewer than 6 in 10 who believe that to be the case. And similarly, the report showed 3 out of 4 HR leaders believing that organisations have clear and transparent progression and promotion criteria, and that fell to half of employees who described their workplaces in that way. So I think, you know, lots of evidence in the report of the real benefits that comes from excellent management, but also of where there's opportunities for further improvement and for building on best practice. And I think some of that practice is also evidenced in the report's findings, because, you know, we find that in workplaces where there's high levels of employee satisfaction, they were more likely to be evidence of managers who have developed concrete action plans about how they are going to deliver inclusion. So moving beyond just the policies to action plans on how they are going to be put into practice. And we also find that although nearly everybody, you know, 90% of decision makers who were surveyed was collecting pay data and information about how to advance equality at work, far smaller percentages were actually using that data to make changes and to inform strategies. So you've got 90% of people collecting it, falling to something like 55% who were then using it to identify barriers to progression or to identify training needs. So, you know, my conclusion from the work is there's some really great work going on where you have good workplaces with high employment standards. You can see those productivity gains that Trevor was talking about, and there's lots of opportunities for change, and that's important because we have seen big changes over the last year, and, you know, those changes are badly needed, because maybe not for some of the better workplaces that were surveyed for this work, or indeed for people who are on this call or who we've heard from already. But we know that for many people at work in the UK, work is very, very far from the high productivity, health enhancing types of employment that we've heard about. And, you know, at the moment, there's about 2 million people working in this country who don't get a single day's sick pay if they're unwell. We know that there is close to 1 million workers on 0-hour contracts where they have absolutely no security as to how many hours they're going to be working every day or what their pattern of work will be. And most of those, 2/3, get no compensation at all if their shifts are cancelled, even at 24 hours notice, despite the fact that very many of them, and they are more likely to be women, people in this situation, more likely to be Black and minority ethnic workers, want regular hours of work. And who wouldn't? Because it's that security and that stability that allows us both to do our best and also to build our wider lives and support our families. So in that context, we are very happy to see the introduction of the Employment Rights Bill. Just today, for those of you who are interested, the government has published some more detail on the implementation timetables for the bill when it receives royal assent. And we think these are common sense reforms. They are going to end a race to the bottom on employment standards. They're going to ensure that good employers who are doing the right thing are not undercut by cowboys who want to make a fast buck off cheap labour. And they're going to set important new standards on security at work. And, you know, some of the measures that are included in that bill, I'm sure we have more time to talk about them in the questions and answers. But yes, rights to guaranteed hours contracts, right to sick pay from day one, improved flexible working rights, so the right to flexible working becomes a default right, and new rights for unions to access workplaces, to talk to staff about the benefits that union membership might bring, and important new rights for equality reps, so union reps who can bring real world experience into business decision making and who can support and work with managers to help them improve the policies that they have in place and make sure that they are being implemented properly. And the other thing I think it's also important to think about in this context is the Mayfield Review, which people may be less aware of, but a really important piece of work that Charlie Mayfield is leading, which is looking at what more can be done to improve job quality in a way that will reduce the flows of people leaving work onto incapacity benefits. And I think his review shows that something like a quarter of the flows at the moment onto out of work benefits are coming from employment. And there's loads of evidence that we can do much better as a country at helping more people who are working alongside ill health or disability to stay in work. And to do so and make a strong, productive contribution for longer. So lots of opportunities for change coming. Absolutely, legislation is not all, but it is an important floor for boosting employment standards and business performance. We believe this is a really important moment for the Good Work agenda, for advancing work quality. We know that managers agree with us. We surveyed very many of them, and the benefits that people reported back to us were improvements in workforce health, improvements in retention, improvements in productivity. Happier, healthier, more engaged workers are some of the benefits that managers anticipate this new legislation is going to bring. So absolutely, those great managers are going to need great training to get their workforces to the right place, to ensure that they do so by giving their workers voice and taking them with them on their journey to the higher productivity, better quality working environments that there's now a really important opportunity to advance. So lots more to talk about, but I think a really exciting opportunity for driving up standards at work.
Nicola, thank you. And I want to say thank you to all our panelists so far for making such important points and also making them in sight of the time limit that we've given you all. So that is much appreciated. Now, I'm going to, let's not muck about, let's go straight to, this is a session for our audience as much as it is for us. So I'm going to go straight to some of the questions that have been asked. And I'm not going to ask everybody to respond on everything. So let me distribute them as follows. First of all, there's a question from, I think it's Archie Mitchell, the Indie, who is asking, particularly to you, Diane, what you think the impact of the government's welfare reforms and how they might affect economic growth. And I want to come to you first. But then there's three others which I just give notice of. There's a question which is about why would we expect we wouldn't. The question is put as we wouldn't allow people on the road without lessons. So why do we think it's acceptable for managers and leaders to lead without any training? And I know, Anne, you've worked quite a lot on the question of the accidental manager. I think is the CMI expression. So maybe Anne and Heather, you might take that one. There is a question essentially about making the sorts of ideas we've been talking about work internationally. The specific references to Egypt, but I wonder if Paul and Raj, both of you, have been active on the international scene. I know that the Green Park places a lot of people abroad. You might want to deal with that question. And lastly, the issue, a really profoundly basic, I was going to say, I don't mean basic in the sense of simple, but really profound question, which is how do we make this agenda more than one of social justice and one about better business? And I wondered if you, Kishwa, and you, Nicola, might want to address that. So let's start with Archie Mitchell's question on welfare reform bill. And you, Dan.
Thank you. Obviously, a highly topical question with the vote this evening. So BDF doesn't focus so much on individual benefits, as there are lots of other disability organisations that are better placed to do that than we are. But we do firmly oppose the cuts that are going through Parliament at present. It was good to see some concessions in the last few days, but that doesn't go far enough. And we're really worried that disabled people will be pushed into poverty, and disabled people are more likely to be in poverty anyway. You'll be aware that at the same time there is investment in employment support. And of course, we welcome that, but we think that needs to be front loaded and in place before any broader cuts are in place, just so that they are actually showing that they work and giving disabled people and anybody who is not working the best chance of getting a good job that works for them. So we would much rather see the emphasis on opening up opportunities for disabled people. And it's important to remember that as well as providing a really important safety net for people who can't work, the benefit system also helps people, disabled people, to find and stay in work. So personal independence payment, for example, is also for people who are working. So it can help working disabled people pay for equipment, treatments that they need to be able to work. So that's really important. Less in the spotlight in the media, but also included in the consultation paper is access to work, and views have been sought on access to work. And we really want to see, and we've responded to the consultation, real investment in that, because it provides such a fantastic support in providing some or all of the costs to making adjustments that disabled people need to find work or to stay in work. And we believe that that is an absolutely essential part of closing and narrowing the disability employment gap. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Thank you, Dan. Kishna, when we come to talk about business and social justice and all that, if there's anything you want to say on this particular question, perhaps on the process by the government's thinking about the review, the impact assessments and so on, please do so. But if I may, I'll turn now to this issue of expecting people who may not have any formal training to be managers and expecting them to be successful managers. Of course, the tradition in this country is that you get a job and you tend to learn by, I think, in the very old days when I started work, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, we used to talk about sitting with Nelly. That is to say, you would sit next to somebody who supposedly knew how to do the job and learned from them. And I think that has been, if you like, the cultural approach to management until recent years. Anne? I think you're on mute, Anne.
Thank you, Trevor, and a great question, whoever put that forward. So it is very puzzling, isn't it, this cult of the accidental manager? Actually, we know in the UK that 8 out of 10 people given managerial roles get no training in management and leadership, no training in how to manage and lead themselves or others or resources. And then we wonder why Nellie might not know what she's doing or he's doing. So really, management is a skill that can be learned. And we really do need to grasp the mettle on this issue, because half the productivity gap in the UK relative to other OECD countries is due to the lack of management and leadership training and investment. And what we absolutely know is that good employers get this. Now, I was very fortunate to start my career at P&G. This is a company that only promoted from within. And I'm not advocating that necessarily as a solution, but because that was the way they worked, they knew that if they didn't train their talent, nobody else was going to do it for them. And it created a culture that really said, let's train people. Let's treat them as though management and leadership is a skill that can be learned. Let's evaluate them not only on their business results, but on how they get those results. And again, companies that do this are more productive. They are more successful. The government has research on this. I think it was the ONS that said a 0.1% improvement in your management and leadership ability delivers a 10 times improvement in your productivity. So the data is there, and it is within our gift. And honestly, if there was one thing I could say to everybody on this call, if you really want to make a difference, invest in training your managers and leaders. You will get more inclusivity, you will get higher engagement, you will get better business results.
Heather.
Well, quite simply, actually, your employees are your most valuable assets. People put that in their annual report, they put that in their marketing collateral, but yet still we don't remember to invest in the people who lead them and train them. And that's something as organisations they need to think at. The number of grievances that happen in organisations because of bad management and bad leadership is something that people really need to think about. So we should be thinking about how we train and educate our leaders to become better leaders. And it's fine if somebody's a great technical expert, but actually there is a skill required in leading people and delivering through your people, which is absolutely really quite key. And the other thing is to make sure that there is budget to do this. Quite often we have budget to do all sorts of things, but we don't have budget put aside to invest in training our people. So if I could leave them with that thought, that would be a great place for them to start.
Think about the money. The second question I wanted to put, I would like Paul and Raj to pick up. Now, I'm going to read it because it relates to Egypt, but I think this probably applies pretty much everywhere, and it's an important one. How can companies in Egypt, it says, navigate the emotional and cultural dynamics that often shape workplace decisions to move EDI beyond a symbolic HR initiative and embed it meaningfully across the organization? Put simply, I suppose, how do we move this from a beautifully designed statement about how much we care that you put up in the lobby to changing behaviors on an everyday basis? Paul.
Thanks, Trevor. I think it starts with kind of sensitivity. You've got to understand the cultural dynamic of the geography that you're dealing with, and I think you've got to be intentional. I mean, these are all buzzwords. You've got to be consistent. But if I can try and give an example of translating that into something that's real, it's taking something that is a symbolic HR initiative, to quote the question, and turning that perhaps into a framework, and then looking to set up employee resource groups that are staffed by different levels of seniority within the workforce to deal with the cultural or emotional dynamics that are in play around EDI, and break that up into projects or smaller bite-sized initiatives that can be dealt with. So you've got a demonstration of quick wins, things you're delivering on. I would suggest that the resource group has a sponsor, someone from the C-suite, that is there to ensure that it stays on message and is working within the framework that's been defined by HR. And then publish and advertise and share decisions that have been made that will have an impact across the workforce. Because I think by doing that, small bite-sized pieces, you'll build confidence with the workforce. They'll start to believe in the intent. It becomes a reality. It does go from say to do, picking up on the piece of work around inclusive management, and it's demonstrating action. And I think start small and then grow, but keep involving the workforce because it's their workplace and it allows them to lead the future of how the business grows.
Okay, thank you. Raj?
Thank you for your question, Mahmood. The answer is absolutely yes. So what I would propose that you consider is actually what your company is trying to achieve. And then when we look at the emotional, that's often unplugging line managers who either have the will but don't have the skill, or who are concerned. So you have to get them to understand whether it's their job. If it's not their job, they might need training. They'll certainly need leadership and confidence. How does it actually help the company commercially or in terms of a reputation? And how does it affect their reputation? When you start talking about the cultural issues, yes, there are different cultural issues, but Egypt is a much more progressive society than many other parts of the Middle East and a much more commercial environment. So once you develop a spine of an argument which allows people in the organization to understand how it benefits them, regardless of where they are on the activist versus this is a total waste of my time versus actually I think this is not the right thing to do. Once they understand how it drives the organization forward, then you get a platform to actually communicate to different parties with different levels of commitment why they should actually get it done anyway. And that purpose and connecting that purpose to the people within the organization is the most important thing. If you look at what's happening in the KSA now, which is probably in a very different position than Egypt, but it's opening up quickly. They've got women in the office and physically in the office with men for the first time. They've got this enormous expat community. They're trying to develop standards that makes them a world-class employer, and yet they're coming at it from a very, very difficult place, albeit one that's extremely well funded. So if they can move things quickly, I've got no doubt that progressive organizations with leaders who care about why this helps them will be able to move things forward. But as with everything, talk is cheap. Only changes in lived experience mean anything.
For those like me, Raj, who don't quite aren't as worldly, KSA?
A Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Thank you so much. Okay, on the issue of essentially persuading people that there's a better business, which ties up with a separate question, but I think related one, been asked, how do we get the message out there to people who aren't going to come on this call because at the moment they think they couldn't really care less? How do you persuade people that the kind of message that is communicated in our report matters to them and their businesses, their business objectives, whether those are individual or corporate? Kishwa.
Trevor, I'm not really the suitable person to answer a comms-related question, and my campaigning days are long over. I'm afraid they're long behind me. But to go to the original point of social justice and how do you make people aware that their agenda should be about more than that, I think this is profoundly important. Of course, businesses care about social justice. They should do, because you can't run an effective business in isolation from the wider pool from which you draw your workforce and their preoccupations and travails. But your question was about more than social justice. And I think that's really important. Because if you focus too much on social justice, you're in danger of turning into an NGO. And that perhaps is not where you want to be as a business, particularly if you care about your bottom line. So if you're thinking about business results, you need to concentrate on the core mission. And maybe that relates a little bit to the question, that earlier question that flashed up. The core mission is not just about the bottom line, but it's about giving tangible skills to your staff, to your people, beyond what they need to do while they're working with you and for you. They need to have skills. They want to have skills that they'll carry with them through life, that will improve their life chances, that will give them moments of better reflection of the wider issues that may have nothing to do with their day-to-day preoccupations while they work for you. I was looking at some work around executive MBAs, those overinflated, super expensive degrees that people pay vast amounts of money for when they're sort of in their mid-30s to 50s in order to get into the C-suite. But the reason those programs are so successful and they can afford to charge so much is because they've understood this a long, long time ago. And that is that the good business leader needs to know more about the world than perhaps they did in knowing about their specialized business. So a good MBA program, EMBA program, will tell you not just about accounting and finance and how to read the better reading of a spreadsheet, but will tell you about climate change, risk, how to measure risk, will tell you about geopolitics and businesses that may be driven by geopolitics to do better or to worse, new business opportunities that may arrive, technological change, as well as, I'm afraid, getting into those nitty-gritty areas that people in management don't like to talk about, which is day-to-day politics and that impact on you. How many business leaders were seriously, at this time last year, talking about the impact on legislation of, for example, a US presidency? I won't go further than that because you told us to leave politics at the dinner table. We'll do that. But I do think that social justice isn't the overriding thing that businesses should be doing in order to feel they're connecting with their workforces. A lot of behavioral insights into workplaces show that people want development, they want tangible skills, and they want those beyond the day-to-day routine skills that they need to master. And that, I think, is the solution.
Diane. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Nicola, I beg your pardon.
Thanks, Trevor. I mean, I suppose my starting point for this is that we live in an unequal society, and for too many people, their ability to give their best and make their most productive contribution at work is held back by structural barriers that are not within their control. And I think there's a really compelling high road reason for businesses to want to change that, because we know that when more people are able to give their best, productivity rates go up. We know that more people are able to build and use their skills. We know that retention increases. We know that the health of the workforce goes up. And we know that where people feel secure, they are more likely to spend in the wider economy, and they're more likely to be able to move jobs with ease in a way that allows them to put their skills to best economic use. So there's a really compelling business case for why it makes sense to act to boost job quality, to act on, playing your part in making our society more equal. I guess the question of how do you move those people who aren't enlightened enough to have realised it already? Well, that's something I've been around for about 20 years. And, I come back to the importance of legislation in setting a floor, because when you have that floor, those people who are meeting it already stop being undercut, and those people who aren't able to open their eyes and see the benefits that come have no choice but to comply. And what do you need to do? Well, you need really strong enforcement to make sure that the legislation works the way it is intended to. You need support for businesses to transition to new ways of working. You need unions in workplaces working with employers productively, making sure there's collective bargaining arrangements in place, making sure there's a voice for the workforce, and making sure that there is a really good flow of information from most people's jobs up to management, up to the senior leadership team, so that problems and challenges can be identified and dealt on in real time rather than festering and never being addressed. And this debate, I think one thing is really important to recognise is that there is an inherent inequality in the workplace. Managers and leaders have got a lot more power than their workforces, and that's the reality of the world of work. That's never going to change. But that's why I believe strongly that collective organisation at work is part of the solution, because it gives people the opportunity to have a voice in a context which will always be unequal, and that gives you the opportunity to hear more in a more meaningful way from your employees about what is happening and what's going on. And it means that the workforce can have a greater chance of working collaboratively with leaders to fix things and to continually improve the workplaces that we're all trying to do our best in. So I think it's a whole combination of factors. I think there's many great employers who already understand the importance of driving up standards and working together with their employees. And, I hope the legislation that we are now seeing brought forward by Parliament will mean that many more are soon going to join them.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. Well, the legislation, I think you're talking about the Employment Rights Bill, I take it, rather than the one that everybody's on tenterhooks about today. So, of course, they're all part of the same tapestry, I think the Deputy Prime Minister would say. Okay. We've got about 10 or 11 minutes before they turn off the clock, or we run out of shillings in the meter, or whatever it is that happens in the digital world. And I just want to come to, I think, a really important question for the session itself. And that is, could the panel each share one practical action they've seen implemented in the workplace which radically helped colleagues feel more included? I'm going to ask you to respond to this in the following order: Diane, then Paul, then Heather, then Raj, then Nicola, then Kishwa, and then I'm going to ask Anne to up our session. So, one practical action that you've seen that radically helped make things different, essentially. And by the way, there's a question that's also come in about examples of effective leadership, and that your answer might bear on that. Diane, what do you think?
Thank you. Hard to pick one, obviously, but I'm going to say a trust-based approach to workplace adjustments. So one of the organisations we work with, GSK, famously, because they speak about it a lot, they've won awards for it, have a process where if you know what adjustment you need, if it's kit or something like that, you can just order it. You don't have to say why, and that comes to you. So you don't have to say it's because I have a disability or just because it's a productivity tool or whatever it is. And what I love about that is also how it's sort of turned on its head, the trust thing. So that they were presenting on it and somebody said, aren't you worried it will be abused? And they said, well, no, because we design our systems for the 99.9% of people who won't abuse them. And what I also love about that was there was someone from a large public sector organisation in the audience. And of course, public money, safeguarding public money, very important, very difficult to do. They managed to go and do that. And for assistive tech, make it trust-based. And after a year, they found that their costs hadn't gone up, the people hadn't started asking for stuff they didn't need, but the turnaround time was so much better, and there's a cost saving in not referring people needlessly to occupational health. So that was a very practical cultural change.
Thank you. Paul?
I was going to say something similar to Diane, so I will choose my number 2, which is related to what I was saying about the resource groups, but perhaps something less formal in regular town halls or team meetings, inviting somebody from within the team to share a real life moment of inclusion that is relevant to them, either directly or indirectly from a family member or a friend, as a mechanism for raising awareness and creating a more inclusive environment.
Okay, anyway, sorry, Heather.
Well, people will always remember how you make them feel. They might not necessarily remember what you say to them. But I do feel that leaders that walk into their offices every day and can't take the time to say good morning to the people around them actually leave them with a really awful taste in their mouth, because they absolutely start to feel that I don't matter. So I think if every leader in the different business areas would just take a few minutes to say good morning to people. How was your weekend? Or how was your day if you've returned to work? How are you? And wait for the answer. Quite often people ask you the questions and they've zoomed past. By the time you've blinked your eye, it's tomorrow and the answer's gone. So I really believe from a communication perspective, if people want the words and figures to add up to what they put on their vision statements about caring about their people, that's a great starting place. Remember how you make people feel.
Raj.
We can't hear you, Raj.
Thank you, Heather, Dr. Heather. 2 quite operational things. The first is through the Race Equality Matters website, there's a product called Tea Break, which is a structured conversation between staff and leadership. There's been great feedback on that. We now have a tea break week, which is designed to fit in the middle of Black History Month. So there's something actually meaningful and intersectional that's going on in there. And the second is around diverse succession planning. So ensuring that your internal and external view of succession planning has between 9 and 19 protected characteristics that might be acquired, inherited, etc. So to actually look at succession planning from different dimensions, we think has made a real difference to how leaders think and then how they can affect lived experience of their own behaviours.
Excellent. Thank you. And Nicola.
Thank you. I've got lots of examples of unions working with employers to deliver change, but I think one that I'd reference, and that might be useful for people on the call, is the work that the TUC and the GMB union have done on reasonable adjustment passports. And if you Google it, you can find these. They are template agreements for employees and employers to work together on that capture adjustments that have been put in place for disabled workers, mean that individuals are better able to see barriers to their employment progression eliminated at work, and mean that there's a clear record of the adjustments that have been agreed and of how they can be shared with new managers or with other colleagues in the organisation. So, I like that because it's a really practical example. It's signed by everybody. It's been developed by unions and it can be used in many workplaces across the country. Just go on our website and you can download a copy.
Thank you. And Kishra.
Thank you. I think I agree with all of those really, really helpful suggestions. I'm going to say something here that might be a little dissonance creating, but I think the current modern workplace that we have now is really suffering from working from home. And I think the mere fact of people spending time together in a shared endeavor, in a shared mission, sometimes eyeballing each other, and I say sometimes because I'm not talking about back to 5-day-a-week work, but people who coming together more physically in order not just to work well, to collaborate, to share problems as well as solutions, but also to feel the human warmth of sharing experiences. Coming back to Heather's point of how are you? How was your weekend? You know, that's so profoundly important. If you can actually physically speak to each other, make a cup of coffee together, I think that makes a profound difference in the shared endeavor that you're all involved in. And I think that as we go forward, we'll really have to seriously think about how disenfranchising it is for bookends of the people who need to work, in isolation alone, and how difficult it is to share problems in those circumstances.
Well, thank you. And I'll make a couple of points. I just wanted to pick up on Kusha's last point. I think there's a lot in that. I'm actually rather an advocate of remote working, but as long as you understand what being on a screen gives you and what it doesn't give you. Just to give you a very simple example, which has happened to me in the last 24 hours. I was at an event yesterday evening, and across the room, there was a woman whose face I recognized, but I couldn't quite place it. And I could see she was looking at me in exactly the same way. And as you can imagine quite how embarrassing that kind of encounter could turn out to be. Anyway, it then turns out, literally, she came out after the event and buttonholed me, and she said, "You don't remember where you saw me, do you?" And I said, "No, not quite sure, but we have met, haven't we?" And she said, "Yes, you interviewed me in your studio 2 weeks ago." And the point is that context really matters. Sometimes you can have if you like, a relationship with people across email, but it's never going to be the same as actually having been occupied the same physical space. Just very quickly, a couple of ideas from my experience. I worked for a large retailer whose name I probably won't mention, but it's never knowingly undersold. And one of the things that absolutely unlocked if you like, the capacity of employees, which were then about 85,000, to be able to speak, was the fact that in 2018 it was, the then boss of the organization did an interview for the internal website in which he revealed that a member of his family had been dealing with very extreme mental health issues, but he talked about it as what he had to do in this case as a parent, and how he managed that and how he dealt with that. And what was very striking was literally the day after, because we'd arranged it so that it was possible for people to share their own experiences, scores of stories came onto the website. And what was most striking about that was that from that point on, everybody had permission not to go about wailing and moaning, but to speak frankly about who they were, what was important to them. And I can say for certain, I think that made a huge difference to that organization, which went through some serious travails at that time. And the other thing, and I'm quite surprised Raj did not mention this, but the fact that he didn't mention it is probably an indication of how much it's become part of the Green Park DNA. We have a rule in the organization that no decision that affects more than a percentage point of turnover can be taken in a room that is not diverse. And that means no big hirings. It means no big investments in our terms can be done by a room that only has blokes in it, or, by the way, only has one person in the room. And I think that's been an important signal to our organization about inclusion, that we take it seriously. And the extent to which we take it seriously is such that, to be frank, I think we don't even think about it anymore. It just is the way we do stuff. And I suspect the days when the occasions in which that doesn't happen, everybody in the room will probably be thinking, is there something wrong about the way we've done this decision, without ever quite coming to mind, what is it that's wrong here? Now, I think that can make a huge difference. Look, I want to thank all our panelists, and I just want to thank everybody who was on the committee for their thoughts. I mean, these things can be gabfests where, everybody sits around and talks about their own travails or their own experiences and makes speeches and so on. But I think in this particular case, it has produced a series of approaches and practical propositions that I hope will spawn 1,000 different ways of thinking and developing the territory that we've been on. Everybody, as a couple of people have said, there's a sort of challenge at the moment to diversity and inclusion. And I think that's reasonable. I think that's completely right. We've made mistakes. There are things we haven't addressed. There are things, to be honest, that many of us have done which fall into the category of virtue signaling, or I would dare say sheer silliness or egotism. And we just also always need to be ready to question ourselves. I think that's perfectly right. But the objective world that we live in, and objectively the workplaces that most of us spend most of our time in, demand an understanding of how we deal with differences, both its frictions and its opportunities. And any business leader that is not thinking seriously about that isn't actually a business leader. So thank you to the committee, and thank you, Anne. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, I just want to add my thanks to the wonderful work of the committee. This committee has been operating now for 3 years under Sir Trevor's leadership. This is the committee's final report. And as you've heard from the very many members of the committee on this webinar, they have excellent examples of real practical interventions that really do make a difference. And the thought that we would leave you with, and that they would leave you with, is it is an economy for everyone. People are your best asset, and it is absolutely the time to put the human back into the world that we call business. But it isn't only the job of the people in human resources. It is everybody's job, and that means it is all of your job. So thank you, Sir Trevor. Thank you to the committee members. Thank you to everybody who joined us today.
Thank you.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI Confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.